Hi, everyone. There are nights when the weight of an empire feels lighter than the silence beside you. In the golden hush of a private chateau dinner outside Paris, a man who commands oceans still carries the quiet ache of loss, unaware that the evening will shift everything he believes about power, loyalty, and the invisible people who see the truth before anyone else. This is the story of that night, and of the voice that refused to stay silent. The chateau stood like a silent sentinel against the twilight sky outside Paris. Its stone walls bathed in the golden glow of antique lanterns that cast long shadows across the gravel drive. Victor Laurent sat at the head of the long mahogany table in the grand dining hall, the weight of his empire pressing against his chest like an invisible hand. At 52, he commanded one of Europe's largest shipping fleets, hundreds of vessels slicing through every ocean on the planet. Contracts worth billions, renewed with a single nod from him. Men in tailored suits and women in silk gowns leaned forward whenever he spoke, their laughter rising exactly when he allowed it, their eyes reflecting the kind of deference only true power could buy. Yet the chair to his right remained empty. It had been 2 years since Isabelle's passing, but the absence still carved a hollow space inside him that no amount of wealth or influence could fill. She had been the one who softened the edges of these evenings, who turned business dinners into something almost human. Now the conversations felt brittle, the smiles calculated. Victor swirled the deep burgundy in his crystal glass, the liquid catching the candlelight like blood. He was alone in a room full of people who needed him far more than he needed them. Marc Duval, his partner of 23 years, occupied the seat directly across from him, laughing a little too loudly at a story Victor had heard a dozen times before. Marc had been there from the very beginning when they were two hungry young men scraping together their first freighter loan in a cramped Marseille office. He knew every secret, every weakness, every shortcut that had built Laurent Global into the colossus it was today. Lately, though, something in Marc's gaze had shifted. It wasn't disrespect, it was something sharper. Hungria. Victor couldn't name it, but he felt it the way a captain feels a change in the wind before the storm arrives. To the future. Marc raised his glass, his voice carrying that familiar warmth that had once been genuine. And to the deal that will make us untouchable. The table erupted in agreement. At the far end sat Sheikh Khalid Al Mansour, the investor whose oil-backed capital could triple their roots into the Gulf. The Sheikh's dark eyes studied Victor with polite calculation, his fingers tapping once against the tablecloth, a small gesture that somehow carried the weight of entire nations. Flanking him were two silent aides and a cluster of European financiers who had flown in just for this private evening. Every one of them was here because Victor Laurent had invited them. Every one of them understood that crossing him meant watching their own empires shrink overnight. Victor lifted his glass in response, the motion automatic, but his mind lingered on the empty chair. Isabelle would have noticed the tension in his shoulders. She would have leaned over and whispered something ridiculous to make him smile. Instead, he was left with Marc's relentless optimism about the Sheikh's terms that felt, in the quiet hours before dawn, just a little too perfect. Victor, Marc continued, leaning forward with that easy confidence that had closed 1,000 deals. You've built something extraordinary, but this partnership, it's the next chapter. No more fighting for scraps in the Mediterranean. We'll own the lanes from Marseille to Dubai. His smile widened, but it didn't quite reach his eyes tonight. You deserve to step back a little. Let the machine run itself for once. The words landed like a subtle challenge. Step back, as if Victor were already fading. He forced a nod, but inside something twisted. Marc had never spoken of him stepping back before. Not once in 23 years. Victor glanced around the table. noting how the others watched their exchange with careful neutrality. Power was a delicate balance here. Victor held the majority shares. The final say. The legacy. Yet Mark controlled the daily operations. The networks. The quiet favors that kept everything moving. They had always been equals in name. Lately, it felt like Mark was testing how far that equality stretched. A soft chime echoed from the hallway beyond the double doors, the discreet signal that the catering team had arrived. Victor had insisted on absolute privacy for this dinner. No press. No unnecessary staff. Only the most discreet service from an exclusive firm known for discretion above all else. He watched the doors swing open with the quiet efficiency of people who knew their place. First came the sommelier. Then 2 assistants carrying silver trays. And then she entered. She moved like someone who had learned to become invisible in rooms exactly like this, mid-30s perhaps. With dark hair pulled into a simple chignon and features that carried the quiet strength of Eastern European winters. Her uniform was crisp black and white. Nothing flashy. Yet she carried herself with a precision that felt almost deliberate. Elena Petrova. According to the brief list the firm had sent earlier, she didn't speak as she began circulating with a tray of chilled amuse-bouches. But her eyes sharp. Slate gray swept the room once, lingering for the briefest moment on Victor before dropping respectfully. Something in that glance unsettled him. Not fear, not deference. It was as if she saw past the legend, past the billions, straight into the hollow space beside him. Victor dismissed the thought. She was staff, nothing more. Yet, as she placed a delicate morsel before the sheik, he noticed how her fingers moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to far more complex tasks than serving canapés. Mark didn't seem to notice her at all. He was already steering the conversation back to the deal, his voice dropping into the confidential tone he used when he wanted to close. The numbers are flawless. Victor, I've had our people run them 6 ways from Sunday. This is our moment. Victor nodded again, but his gaze kept drifting to the woman now refilling water glasses along the opposite side of the table. She worked in silence, yet he could feel her presence like a quiet current beneath the surface chatter. For the first time that evening, the empty chair beside him felt less like grief and more like a warning. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the ancient oaks that guarded the chateau. Inside, the candles flickered, and somewhere in the careful rhythm of the dinner beginning, unseen eyes were already watching everything unfold. Elena Petrova kept her steps measured. The silver tray balanced perfectly on her palm as she circled the table for the 3rd time. The chateau's dining hall smelled of aged oak, melting wax, and the faint metallic edge of expensive cologne. She had worked enough private events to know the rhythm: appear only when needed, vanish when not, speak only when spoken to, become part of the wallpaper. It was a skill she had perfected over the last 4 years, ever since the life she once knew had been stripped away in a boardroom in Geneva. Tonight felt different. She had recognized Victor Laurent the moment she stepped through the service door, not because of the magazine covers or the shipping empire that moved more cargo than some small countries. She recognized the exhaustion behind his eyes, the same hollow look she saw in her own reflection every morning. A man carrying more than his fortune. A man who had lost the one person who made the weight bearable. She had read the quiet obituary 2 years ago. Isabelle Laurent. Cancer. The kind of loss that no amount of money could negotiate with. Elena placed a small porcelain dish of seared scallop in front of the sheik's younger aide. A man whose watch cost more than her mother's entire apartment in the 19th arrondissement. As she straightened, her ear caught a fragment of conversation drifting from the far end of the table. Mark Duval was leaning toward one of the sheik's men. Voice low, but not low enough. The revised routing adds 17% margin had him. Victor doesn't need to see the interim ledger. He trusts me. The aide gave the smallest nod. The kind that sealed quiet arrangements between powerful men. Elena's pulse did not quicken. She had trained herself against that. Instead, she filed the words away exactly as she once filed discrepancies in seven-figure audits. 17%. The official proposal she had glimpsed while polishing glasses in the prep kitchen had listed 9. Someone was skimming before the ink was even dry. She moved on, refilling Victor's water without looking directly at him. Yet she felt his gaze follow her for half a second longer than necessary. Not the usual appraisal men in these rooms gave the staff. Something heavier. Curious, almost grateful that someone in the room wasn't performing for him. Victor watched the server's hands. They moved with the economy of someone who had once handled far more delicate instruments than crystal stemware. No tremor. No hesitation. When she adjusted the shake's plate, she angled it exactly 3 degrees to accommodate the man's preference for left-handed service, a detail no one else at the table had noticed. Victor caught himself wondering how she knew. Then he caught himself wondering why he cared. Mark's laugh boomed again, pulling Victor's attention back. Gentlemen, the beauty of this partnership is simplicity. We move your oil. You move our containers. Everyone wins. He clapped Victor on the shoulder the way old friends do. But the grip lingered a fraction too long. Isn't that right? Partner Victor smiled the required smile. Always has been. Inside, the word partner tasted sour tonight. 23 years of shared hotel rooms. Shared risk. Shared secrets. Mark had cried at Isabel's funeral harder than anyone except Victor himself. Yet lately the man spoke of the company as if it were already half his. Victor pushed the thought down. Paranoia was a luxury a man in his position could not afford. Still, his eyes found the server again. She was now at the sideboard. Arranging fresh glasses, her posture was perfect, but her head was slightly tilted, as though listening to something the rest of the room had missed. Elena felt the shift in the air when the sheikh excused himself briefly. Mark followed a moment later, motioning for one of the aides to join them in the adjoining salon. The double doors clicked shut, but not completely. A narrow gap remained standard in old chateaus where wood swelled and settled. Elena moved toward the sideboard closest to that gap under the pretense of checking the ice supply. No one paid her any mind. Staff were furniture. Inside the salon, voices carried in low French, laced with Arabic phrases for emphasis. Mark, the escrow release is set for the 15th. Once Victor signs, we reroute the first 3 vessels through the shell company in Malta. He'll never trace the skim. The aide's reply was calm, almost bored. And if he questions the fuel surcharge, Mark chuckled softly. He won't. The man is grieving. Not stupid, but grief makes everyone slower. By the time he notices, we'll be too deep in the Gulf contracts to unwind. Elena's fingers tightened around a silver tongs. Shell company. Malta. Fuel surcharge. She had seen this pattern before in the very firm that had blacklisted her after she refused to sign off on similar creative accounting. 4 years ago, she had been the youngest senior analyst at Durand & Voss. Fluent in 5 languages. Feared in 3 boardrooms. 1 honest report later. And suddenly, her credentials were unverifiable. Her name quietly erased from recommendation lists. Now her mother's heart condition required monthly specialists in Paris. And the only jobs that asked no questions were the ones where no one looked twice at the woman pushing the trolley. She allowed herself one slow breath. Then she turned back toward the main hall. Victor had risen to stretch his legs near the tall windows. The night pressed against the glass, dark and absolute, when Elena passed him with a fresh decanter. Their eyes met for the first time, without the barrier of a table between them. She saw the question there before he could hide it. "Who are you really?" She almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she poured, voice soft and accented, "More wine." Monsieur Victor shook his head. Then, against every instinct that had kept him alive in boardrooms for decades, he asked, "You've done this kind of service long?" Elena kept her gaze on the ruby liquid. "Long enough to know when the room is heavier than the wine." The words were out before she could stop them. Too much. Too direct. She expected dismissal. Perhaps irritation. Instead, Victor's brow furrowed. Not with anger, but with recognition. As if someone had finally spoken the truth he had been swallowing all evening. Mark re-entered the dining hall then, clapping once. All charm and ease. "Gentlemen, shall we move to the main course? The chef has prepared something extraordinary." The moment broke. Victor turned back to his guests. Elena returned to her station by the wall. But something had shifted in the air between them. Invisible to everyone else. A thread pulled taut. Later, while clearing the first course, she heard Mark mutter to the Sheikh's aide near the doorway, "Tomorrow morning. 8 sharp. We lock it in before he changes his mind." The aide answered in Arabic. Low and satisfied, "The old lion is tired. We take the pride while he sleeps." Elena understood every syllable. She had learned Arabic the same summer she learned Mandarin, back when languages were weapons, and she had been the sharpest blade in the room. She set the plates down with hands that no longer felt steady. Victor Laurent was about to sign away pieces of his life to men who already thought he was finished, and the only person in the chateau who knew it was the woman paid to keep his water glass full. She glanced once more at the empty chair beside him, then at the man who still carried the shape of grief like a second shadow. Elena made a decision in the space of a single heartbeat. Some risks were measured in money. Others were measured in what remained of a person's soul. She would not let this one pass in silence. The second course arrived on waves of quiet efficiency: roasted quail with truffle jus. Each plate a small masterpiece arranged by hands that had once balanced far more precarious ledgers. Elena moved between the guests like a shadow given form, her black uniform blending into the candlelit opulence of the chateau's dining hall. She had learned early in this second life that silence was armor. Tonight, though, the armor felt thinner than usual. Victor was deep in conversation with the sheikh when it began. Mark had just launched into one of his favorite anecdotes, the time they'd nearly lost a ship to a Mediterranean storm in '09 when Elena approached to top up the water glasses. She leaned in politely, pitcher steady, and offered in her measured voice, "More water." Monsieur. The word monsieur carried the soft lilt of her native Bulgarian. The consonants rounded just enough to betray Eastern European roots. Nothing dramatic, nothing rude. But Mark's head snapped toward her mid-sentence, his story pausing like a record scratch. "Say that again," he said. Not unkindly at first, but with the indulgent tone of a man entertaining his guests at someone else's table. Elena straightened slightly. "More water." "Monsieur." There it was again, that gentle roll on the R. The way her tongue shaped the French like it had been borrowed rather than born into. A couple of the financiers chuckled. One of the sheikh's aides raised an eyebrow, amused. The sheikh himself remained impassive, but his lips twitched once. Mark leaned back, wine glass in hand, and grinned the way men do when they sense an easy laugh at no personal cost. "You hear that? Khalid. She makes it sound like poetry from the old country. Where are you from?" "Love Romania. Poland. Bulgaria. Monsieur, Elena replied calmly, her eyes fixed on the pitcher as though the crystal held all the answers in the universe. She did not smile. She did not shrink. "Ah, Bulgaria," Mark repeated, drawing the word out for the table's benefit. "Beautiful place. Used to run cargo through Varna back in the day. Tell me, do they still teach French in school there? Or is this all on-the-job training?" The chuckle spread now, low and conspiratorial, the kind that bonds powerful men by reminding them who is on the outside. One of the European bankers joined in. "Careful, Mark. She might be secretly running the place. These Eastern girls are clever." "I hear." Victor heard every word. He sat at the head of the table. Fork paused above his quail. The conversation about routing schedules suddenly distant. He knew the tone. He had heard it in ports from Singapore to Santos, subtle, almost playful jabs that drew lines between those who belonged and those who served. Isabel had hated it. She would have shut it down with one quiet look. But Isabel wasn't here. Victor opened his mouth. The words enough were already forming on his tongue. Then Mark clapped him on the shoulder again. That same too familiar grip. And steered the story back to the storm of '09, painting Victor as the hero who had saved the day. The table turned toward him expectantly. The moment passed. Elena continued her circuit without missing a beat. When she reached Victor's side, she refilled his glass in perfect silence. He caught the faint scent of lavender soap and something sharper, perhaps the residue of the disinfectant she had used on her hands before service. Up close, he noticed the small callus on her middle finger, the kind left by years of holding a pen rather than a serving tray. Their eyes met for half a second. In that glance, Victor saw no anger, no plea, only a steady, unyielding dignity that made the laughter around the table feel suddenly cheap. He looked away first, ashamed without quite knowing why. It was just staff banter, harmless, the kind that happened at every private dinner from Monaco to Manhattan. Yet the hollow space beside him seemed to widen. Mark wasn't finished. Later, when the quail was cleared and the sommelier presented a rare burgundy, Mark waved Elena over to pour. "Careful with this one. Darling, it's older than you are. Try saying the name for us. Show the sheikh how the Bulgarians do French." The table quieted, expectant. Even the sheikh leaned forward slightly, sensing sport. Elena's hand remained perfectly steady as she tilted the bottle. "Chateau Margaux, Lianchen Wu," she said softly, the accent threading through the words like a quiet river through stone. The ch softened. The r rolled once. Gently, Mark burst out laughing first. Delighted. "There it is. Chateau Margaux. No, listen to that. It's adorable. Say it again. Slower. For the sheikh." A few more laughs. One of the aides recorded it on his phone, pretending it was for the wine notes. Victor's jaw tightened. He felt the heat rise under his collar, not rage exactly, but something heavier. Discomfort. The kind that sits in the gut and refuses to be swallowed. He had built his empire on respect for competence, on never humiliating the people who kept the machines running. Yet here he was, letting his oldest friend turn a woman's careful pronunciation into after-dinner entertainment. He glanced at Elena. She poured the last drop with the same precision she had shown all evening, then stepped back, head high, expression unchanged. No flush of embarrassment, no tremor in her voice when she asked the next guest if they would like more. Victor told himself it was nothing. Mark was playing host, loosening the room before the serious talk resumed. The sheikh seemed entertained. The deal was still on track. But the excuse felt thin even as he thought it. Inside, something older stirred. Memories of his own father, a dockworker in Marseille, who had been mocked for his thick Provençal accent by the very bankers who later financed their first ship. Victor had sworn he would never become that kind of man. Yet tonight, he had chosen silence over correction. Comfort over courage. The conversation shifted back to contracts and projected margins. Victor forced himself to engage, nodding at the right moments, asking the right questions, but his mind kept returning to the server now stationed quietly by the sideboard. She had said nothing in her own defense, had not appealed to him with her eyes, had simply endured with a grace that made the mockery feel smaller than the people laughing at it. Mark caught Victor's distant expression and leaned across the table. "You all right? Partner, you look like you swallowed a bad oyster." Victor managed a half smile. "Just thinking about the escrow terms." Mark winked. "Leave that to me. I've got it locked down." The words should have reassured him. Instead, they landed like another small weight on the growing pile of unease. Victor looked once more toward Elena. She was adjusting a candle that had dripped wax onto the linen. Her movements calm, almost meditative. For the first time that evening, he wondered what thoughts moved behind those slate-gray eyes, what stories she carried that made her able to stand so straight while the room treated her like background music. The seed had been planted, not outrage yet, not full regret, just the first quiet crack in the certainty that he was still the man Isabel had loved, the man who never let power excuse cruelty. Outside the tall windows, the wind had risen to a low moan through the oaks. Inside, the candles burned lower, and Victor Laurent, master of fleets and fortunes, felt for the first time that evening that the real storm might not be coming from the sea at all. The laughter from the table lingered like smoke from an expensive cigar, thick and lingering, curling around the crystal and the silver. Mark Duval raised his glass, the burgundy catching the light like liquid fire, and waved Elena back with a grand gesture as if she were part of the evening's entertainment rather than the person keeping it running. "No. No. Come back, darling. The sheik here has never heard a Bulgarian do French. It's charming. Say the name again slowly this time. Chateau Margaux. Let's hear it properly." Elena paused mid-step, the empty bottle still in her hand. Her back was to most of the table, but Victor saw the briefest tightening of her shoulders. She turned with the same quiet grace she had shown all evening, the uniform spotless despite the long hours. "Chateau Margaux. L'Ensending-Wu," she repeated, the accent threading through the words like a soft thread in fine fabric, noticeable but not intrusive. Mark shook his head, laughing harder. "No. No. No. Slower. Like you're tasting it. Chateau Margaux." He exaggerated the roll, mimicking her pronunciation with theatrical flair, drawing out the R until it sounded like a cartoonish growl. The table erupted. The European financiers slapped the linen. One of the sheikh's aides pulled out his phone again, recording openly now, the red light blinking like a tiny accusation. Even the sheikh allowed a low chuckle, his dark eyes glinting with detached amusement. "Again," Mark insisted, leaning forward so the candlelight carved shadows across his face. "And this time, add the vintage. Make it sound exotic. Chateau Margaux, 2005. He rolled his eyes dramatically toward Victor. "Come on, partner. Back me up. This is better than the cabaret in Monte Carlo." Victor's fingers tightened around the stem of his own glass. The words were there, sharp, immediate, enough. They burned on his tongue, the way the wine burned in his throat. He could feel the eyes of the room shifting toward him, waiting for the host to either join the fun or end it. Isabel's empty chair seemed to pulse in his peripheral vision. A silent judgment. She would have stood by now. She would have touched Mark's arm lightly and changed the subject with one elegant sentence. But Victor stayed seated, the weight of 23 years of partnership anchoring him to the chair. Mark wasn't cruel, he told himself, just exuberant. The deal was too important to fracture the mood over a harmless joke. Elena's gaze flicked to Victor for the first time since the mockery began. It was not pleading, not angry, just disappointed. A quiet, steady disappointment that cut deeper than any shout could have. In that single second, her slate-gray eyes seemed to ask the question no one else in the room would dare. Is this who you are now? Victor looked away first. Chateau Margaux. 2005. Elena said again, her voice perfectly even, the accent unchanged. She even added a small, professional smile, the kind waitstaff learned to wear like a second skin when the powerful decide to play. Mark clapped. There, see, she's a natural. Now do the whole menu for us. Escargot. Foie gras. Say it like you're in a Paris bistro. Not wherever you learned it. He waved at the sommelier to bring another bottle. Then turned to the sheikh. Khalid, you have to hear this. These Eastern girls have such character. Makes the wine taste better. Doesn't it? The sheikh inclined his head politely. But his smile had cooled. The aides exchanged glances. The financiers laughed louder, feeding off Mark's energy the way sharks circle blood in the water. One of them tried to top it, ask her to say bon appetit next. I bet it comes out like a folk song. Elena stood motionless, tray balanced, waiting for the next command as though it were any other request for more bread or another napkin. Victor watched her hands, those precise, capable hands that had adjusted the sheikh's plate with such instinctive care, and felt something inside him twist painfully. He had spent his life building an empire on competence, on never wasting talent, on respecting the invisible machinery that kept his ships sailing. Yet here he was, letting his oldest friend reduce a woman to a parlor trick because it made the room feel lighter. The silence from Victor stretched. Mark noticed. What's wrong? Old friend, you look like you swallowed the cork. Lighten up, it's just dinner talk. Victor forced a chuckle that tasted like ash. The wine's excellent, he managed. Let's not keep the lady from her work. It was the weakest deflection possible. Mark waved it off with another laugh and turned back to Elena. One more time. Love. Full sentence. Would you like to try the Chateau Margaux? 2005. Come on. For the sheikh. Elena drew a breath so small no one else would have seen it. Would you like to try the Chateau Margaux? 2005. Monsieur. The accent rolled through the sentence like a wave. The table howled. Mark slapped the table so hard the glasses trembled. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. You should do this professionally. The humiliation had moved past playful into something sharper, more systematic. Every repetition stripped another layer of dignity, turning her quiet professionalism into public spectacle. Victor felt each laugh like a small cut. He remembered his father's stories, how the dock foreman in Marseille had once mocked the thick Provençal accent of new immigrants until they learned to swallow their pride or leave. Victor had sworn then that power would never make him that man. Yet tonight he had become the host who allowed it. Elena finished the performance and stepped back toward the sideboard. Head still high. No tears. No tremor. Just that same unyielding composure that made the mockery feel suddenly small and ugly. Victor's chest ached with a guilt he had no name for yet. He told himself it was nothing, that she was paid well, that tomorrow she would forget, that the deal with the sheikh was worth the momentary discomfort. But the lie sat heavy beside the empty chair. Mark leaned across to Victor, voice low now that the laughter had crested. "See, keeps the energy up. These people expect a show when they come to a Laurent dinner." He winked. "You'll thank me when the contracts are signed." Victor nodded once, the motion mechanical. Inside, the crack in his certainty had widened into a fissure. For the first time, he saw Mark not as the loyal brother-in-arms, but as a man who had grown comfortable wielding the power Victor had built. Comfortable enough to use it on someone who could not fight back. The main course arrived, filet of sole meunière. Delicate and steaming, but the taste was lost on Victor. He ate mechanically, answering questions about fleet expansions and insurance rates, all while his mind replayed that single disappointed glance from Elena, the woman who had noticed the weight he carried, the woman he had just failed to protect in his own house. Outside, the wind moaned louder through the ancient oaks, as if the chateau itself were sighing in disapproval. Inside, the candles burned lower. The laughter continued, and Victor Laurent, for the first time in decades, felt truly small at the head of his own table. The dinner had stretched into its third hour. The main course had been cleared, replaced by a selection of cheeses and a 1,982 Armagnac that cost more than most people earned in a year. The conversation had grown looser, the laughter louder, the deals closer to being sealed with every raised glass. Victor Laurent stood near the tall French doors that opened onto the terrace, needing air. The mockery of Elena earlier still sat uneasily in his stomach. He told himself it was nothing, that Mark was simply being Mark, boisterous, larger than life. But the memory of her disappointed eyes kept resurfacing. He sensed her before he saw her. Elena appeared at his side with a small silver tray holding 2 fresh glasses of water, as if anticipating his thirst. The other guests were engaged in animated discussion at the table. For a brief moment, they were relatively alone. She kept her voice extremely low, almost a breath. "Monsieur Laurent, ne signez rien demain matin." Victor froze. The voice that came from her was nothing like the accented French he had heard all evening. This was perfect, Parisian French, elegant, precise, educated, with the natural cadence of someone who had studied at the Sorbonne or Sciences Po. No trace of Bulgaria, no lilt, no hesitation. It was the French of the elite. He turned slowly, staring at her. She continued in the same flawless tongue, eyes locked on the tray, as though discussing the weather. "The routing agreement contains a hidden clause. A shell company in Malta will receive 17% of the margin on the first 36 months. The vessels will be rerouted through accounts controlled by Marc Duval and one of the Sheik's silent partners. By the time you notice the discrepancy, over 200 million euros will have disappeared. They are counting on your trust." Victor felt the ground tilt beneath him. The Armagnac suddenly tasted bitter. He stared at the woman in the server's uniform, this time really seeing her. "Who are you?" he whispered in French. Elena's gaze remained steady, but there was a new urgency in her eyes. Someone who has seen this exact pattern before. Someone who knows what it costs when powerful men look the other way. "Please, do not sign tomorrow. Ask for an independent audit of the Malta entity first." Victor's mind raced. The shock of her perfect French had momentarily stunned him, but years of boardroom instinct kicked in. This was impossible. A server, a woman they had all been laughing at just hours ago. How could she possibly know these details? He glanced back at the table. Mark was laughing with the sheikh, gesturing broadly, completely at ease. his oldest friend, the man who had stood beside him through bankruptcy threats, through Isabel's illness, through everything. Victor's voice came out colder than he intended. You overheard conversations, and now you think you understand high-level finance. This is my company. Marc Duval has been my partner for 23 years. I suggest you return to your duties before I have you removed from the property. The words left a sour taste. He saw the impact immediately. Elena's expression didn't crumble, but something behind her eyes closed off. The brief light of hope dimmed. She gave the smallest nod. Very well. Monsieur. She turned to leave, but paused for half a second. One more thing. Your wife, Isabel, she would not have stayed silent tonight. She would have protected what you built. Then she walked away. Back straight. Tray steady. Disappearing toward the service corridor without another word. Victor stood frozen by the doors, the cool night air brushing his face. The flawless French still echoed in his ears. The specific numbers, the Malta company, the exact percentage, details no simple server could possibly know. For the first time that evening, real doubt crept in, cold and insistent. What if she was right? He looked at Marc again, now raising another toast. The man who had called her accent adorable and turned her into entertainment. The man pushing hardest for this deal. Victor's hand tightened around his glass until his knuckles turned white. A wave of regret hit him hard, not just for the way he had spoken to her, but for the way he had remained silent when Marc humiliated her. For the first time, the empty chair beside him felt like an accusation. He had just dismissed the only person who had tried to warn him, and something deep inside told him he might have made a terrible mistake. The morning light sliced through the tall windows of Victor Laurent's private study at the chateau, turning the antique mahogany desk into a surface of sharp gold and shadow. He had barely slept. The flawless French of the server Elena echoed in his mind like a recording stuck on repeat. Ne signez rien demain matin. The precise details about Malta. The 17%. The rerouting. He had dismissed her with the cold authority of a man who believed his world was still intact. Now, in the quiet aftermath, that dismissal tasted like rust. Victor sat with his coffee untouched, staring at the empty chair across from him, the one he had dragged in from the dining hall last night without thinking. It felt like a witness. He reached for his phone to call the head of the catering firm, intending only to confirm the staff had left cleanly. The conversation was brief, professional, until the manager's voice dropped, regarding Elena Petrova. Monsieur, we had to let her go immediately after the event. The client, your associate, Monsieur Duval, insisted. He said her behavior was disrespectful. Something about overstepping during service. We've already processed her final pay and removed her from our roster. Victor's grip tightened on the phone. Fired? For what? Exactly. A pause. Monsieur Duval was very clear. He mentioned an incident at the table. We don't question our clients, especially not one of your stature. She's gone. The call ended, but the silence that followed pressed in harder than any storm at sea. Victor stood slowly, pacing the length of the study. Fired. Because of him. Because he had stayed silent while Marc turned her into entertainment. Then because he had shut her down when she risked everything to warn him. The woman who had carried grief in her eyes the same way he carried his own. Gone. Just like that. Guilt was not a feeling Victor Laurent allowed himself often. He had built an empire by moving forward, by making decisions that hurt others less than they hurt him. But this morning, the guilt arrived uninvited, heavy and precise. He saw her face again, the quiet disappointment when he had told her to return to her duties. the way her shoulders had remained straight even as he dismissed the only honest voice in the room. He opened his laptop. It was meant to be a quick check just to ease his conscience. Perhaps send a severance payment through the firm. Anonymous. Something. Instead, he typed her name into the secure database his security team used for background checks on high-value contracts. Elena Petrova. The results loaded in seconds. What appeared was not the resume of a career server. Born in Sofia, Bulgaria. Itsenjobai Pashajo. Moved to Paris at 19 on full scholarship, Masters in International Finance from Sciences Po. Graduating top of her class. Fluent in Bulgarian, French, English, German, Arabic, and Mandarin. Joined Durand and Voss in Geneva at 24 as the youngest senior risk analyst in their European division. Promoted twice in 18 months. Then, nothing. A 4-year blank. No references. No LinkedIn. No trace in any professional network. Victor leaned closer. He cross-referenced with public records. A single article from a Swiss financial journal. Buried deep Durand and Voss analyst removed after refusing to certify irregular Gulf shipping accounts. The piece was careful. Almost coded. No names. But the timeline matched. And the description of the irregularities sounded painfully familiar: shell companies. Rerouted margins. Silent partners skimming before contracts closed. He kept digging. Medical records sealed. But his team had ways. Her mother, Nadia Petrova, 71. Advanced congestive heart failure. Living in a modest apartment in the 19th arrondissement. Monthly specialist visits costing more than a server's annual salary. Elena had been covering them entirely for the last 3 years. No father listed. No siblings. Only a mother whose life depended on the kind of quiet, relentless work that left no room for pride. Victor closed the laptop. But the images stayed burned behind his eyes. A woman with a mind sharp enough to spot fraud in 7-figure ledgers, reduced to pouring wine for men who mocked her accent for sport. Reduced further because he had failed to speak. The internal war began in earnest now, not the vague unease of last night, but a full, tearing conflict. Mark had been family. The brother who had held him together when Isabel received her diagnosis. The one who had flown across continents when Victor couldn't leave her bedside. Loyalty like that wasn't easily questioned. Yet the facts sat cold and undeniable. Mark had fired her within hours of the dinner. Mark had pushed the deal hardest. Mark had laughed loudest while Elena stood there, enduring. Victor walked to the window. Below, the gravel drive still showed tire marks from the guests' departure. The Sheik's convoy had left at dawn. The contracts were scheduled for signing at 10. Mark would be here soon. Smiling, ready to close. The moral dilemma crystallized in the silence. If he confronted Mark now, he risked fracturing the foundation of everything they had built. 23 years, thousands of employees, families whose lives depended on Laurent Global remaining stable. If Elena was wrong, or worse, if she had her own agenda, Victor would destroy his oldest friendship for nothing. But if she was right, then staying silent made him complicit in the slow dismantling of his own empire. And worse, it made him the same kind of man who had once laughed at his father's accent on the docks. He thought of Isabel again. She would have demanded he find Elena immediately. She would have said the truth mattered more than comfort. But Isabel was gone, and Victor was left with the hollow echo of his own cowardice. His phone buzzed. Mark. Morning. Partner. Everything set for the signing. Sheikh's team is already waiting at the Paris office. This is it. Victor. The big one. Victor stared at the message. His thumb hovered over the reply. He could still pretend. He could sign, let the machine run, and bury the doubt where it couldn't touch him. Instead, he typed nothing. He deleted the draft. The guilt had become something sharper now, purpose. He needed to know. Not for the company, not even for the money, for the woman whose eyes had asked him who he really was, and for the man he no longer wanted to see in the mirror. Victor picked up the phone again and called his private investigator, the one who never asked questions. Find Elena Petrova. Current address. Everything. Discreetly. And get me the full file on the Malta shell company and the Sheikh's proposal. By noon. He hung up. The study felt smaller. The empty chair stared back at him like a judgment he could no longer avoid. For the first time in years, Victor Laurent was not sure which side of the line he stood on. Loyalty or truth, old friendship or new conscience. And the silence in the room answered only with the ticking of the antique clock, counting down to a decision that would change everything. The rain fell in thin, cold sheets over the Dixmuff arrondissement, turning the narrow streets into glistening mirrors. Victor Laurent sat in the back corner of a small, unremarkable cafe called Les Temps Perdus, a place where no one would expect to find one of Europe's most powerful shipping magnates. He wore a simple dark coat and kept his head low, the collar turned up. For the first time in decades, he felt exposed, vulnerable, like a man who had stepped outside the walls of his own legend. His investigator had found her in less than 4 hours. Elena Petrova. Current address listed under her mother's name. No social media. No public profile. Just a woman trying to disappear while keeping her mother alive. The bell above the door chimed softly. She entered, shaking rain from her dark hair, wearing a plain gray coat that had seen better days. Their eyes met. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before walking to his table and sitting down without a word. Victor had prepared a dozen opening lines. None of them felt right now. He pushed a cup of black coffee toward her. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. Elena wrapped her hands around the warm cup but didn't drink. "I almost didn't, after the way you spoke to me at the chateau. I thought you were exactly like the rest of them." Victor winced. The words landed like a slap he had earned. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice rough. "I was arrogant, and I was scared. That combination makes men cruel. I'm sorry." Elena studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether the apology was genuine or just another calculated move. Finally, she reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. She placed it on the table between them but kept her hand on it. "Before I show you anything, you need to understand who I am. Or rather, who I used to be." She spoke calmly, but Victor heard the pain beneath the surface. "My name is Elena Petrova. Until 4 years ago, I was a senior risk analyst at Durand & Voss in Geneva. I specialized in maritime finance and complex international routing contracts. I was good at it. Very good. Top of my class at Sciences Po. I spoke 6 languages fluently. They used me to audit high-risk Gulf and Mediterranean deals." Victor's eyes widened slightly. Everything his background check had shown was true. "Then I found something I wasn't supposed to see," she continued. "A shipping consortium was using shell companies to siphon funds. Similar structure to what I saw at your dinner. I documented everything. I refused to sign the certification. 2 weeks later, my entire career was erased. They called it professional incompatibility. No one would hire me after that. Not with the quiet word that had been spread." She opened the folder and slid the first document across the table. It was a copy of an internal memo from Durand & Voss. marked confidential. Victor scanned it. The language was clinical, but the intent was clear. Destroy the credibility of the analyst who wouldn't play along. I've been working service jobs ever since, Elena said, her voice steady but quieter, because the medical bills from my mother don't wait for justice, and because no one looks twice at a server when they're discussing millions. Victor felt the full weight of what he had done at the chateau settle on his chest. He had allowed Mark to humiliate a woman who had once moved in the same circles as the people now trying to destroy him. Elena pulled out more papers, screenshots, bank transfer records, and a detailed financial analysis written in her own hand. Last night, I wasn't guessing. While serving, I heard Mark discussing the Malta entity with the Sheikh's aide. I recognized the pattern immediately because I've seen it twice before. Here, she pointed to several highlighted lines. 17% margin diversion. Exactly the same percentage they used in the Geneva case. The shell company in Malta is registered to a holding that traces back to Mark Duval through 3 layers of proxies. He's been planning this for at least 14 months. This isn't opportunism. This is premeditated. Victor stared at the documents. The numbers didn't lie. The patterns were too precise. His oldest friend, the man who had been best man at his wedding, who had sat beside Isabel's hospital bed for weeks, was systematically dismantling the company they had built together. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Why? Victor whispered. More to himself than to her. We were brothers. I trusted him with everything. When Isabel was dying, he was there. Elena's expression softened for the first time. People change when the numbers get big enough. Or maybe he was always this way and you didn't want to see it. Power reveals who we really are. Victor pushed the papers away slightly, as if distance could make the truth less painful. His hands were trembling. The great Victor Laurent, who commanded oceans, was shaking in a small Paris cafe. I let him humiliate you, he said, voice breaking slightly. I sat there like a coward while he turned you into a joke. And when you tried to warn me, I threw it back in your face. I don't know how to live with that. Elena remained silent for a long moment. You still have a choice, Monsieur Laurent. You can sign the deal tomorrow and pretend you never saw any of this. Or you can stop it, but understand if you choose to fight. Mark will not hesitate to destroy you. He's already prepared the narrative that you've been unstable since your wife's death. Victor looked up, eyes burning. Then let him try. For the first time since Isabel's death, something other than grief or numbness filled his chest. It was rage, clean, sharp, and directed. But beneath it was something even more dangerous: fear. Fear that the man he had trusted most in the world had been preparing to bury him. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, the woman who had lost everything for doing the right thing, the woman he had failed the night before. I need all of it, he said. Everything you have. And I need your help. Elena closed the folder slowly. Helping you almost cost me my mother's treatment before. If I do this again, I need to know you won't abandon me when it gets ugly. Victor extended his hand across the table. I won't make the same mistake twice. She didn't shake it immediately. The rain continued falling outside. 2 damaged people sat across from each other, bound by betrayal and a fragile thread of trust. Finally, Elena placed her hand in his. The agreement was sealed in silence. But as Victor looked at the documents again, one terrible question burned in his mind. How deep did Mark's betrayal actually go? Victor Laurent stood alone in the chateau's private library. The same room where Isabel had once read to him late into the night. The rain from Paris had followed him back. drumming against the leaded windows like impatient fingers. On the massive oak table lay Elena's folder. Its pages spread like accusations. He had read them 3 times. Each time the numbers cut deeper. 17%. Malta. The same quiet theft he had once dismissed as paranoia. He paced, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Protect Elena and risk everything: his company, his legacy, the thousands of families who depended on Laurent Global, or stay silent and preserve the empire he had bled for. The choice felt impossible, like trying to choose which limb to lose. Mark had been more than a partner. He had been the only constant when the world collapsed after Isabel's diagnosis. Victor could still see him sitting vigil in the hospital corridor, bringing coffee at 3 a.m. Never asking for thanks. How did a man do that for 23 years and then plan to gut the very company they had raised together? His phone vibrated on the table. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Then he answered. Victor, it's Philippe Moreau. The voice hit him like a wave from the past. Philippe Moreau, Isabel's oldest friend and personal lawyer. The man who had handled her estate with quiet dignity and never once tried to bill him extra. Victor hadn't spoken to him in 18 months, not since the will reading. Philippe, how did I still have access to certain alerts on your personal accounts? Philippe said calmly. When large movements happen in the escrow preparations for the chic deal. My old system pings me. Old habit from protecting Isabel's interests. Victor, I need to see you. Today. There are things about Mark you don't know. Victor's pulse spiked. A hidden ally. Someone who had loved Isabel as fiercely as he had. Someone outside the company machine. Tell me now. Victor demanded. Not on the phone. Meet me at the old boathouse on the Seine in 1 hour. And Victor, bring the documents the woman gave you. Elena Petrova. Victor froze. How do you know her name? Because Isabel asked me to keep an eye on certain people after she was gone, including anyone who might try to reach you with the truth. Come alone. The line went dead. Victor stared at the phone. Isabel had arranged this even from beyond the grave. She was still guiding him. The thought should have brought comfort. Instead, it sharpened the dilemma. If he met Philip, he was choosing Elena's side, choosing to protect the woman he had humiliated, choosing to burn the bridge with Mark. He grabbed his coat. The decision felt made until his phone buzzed again. This time, a secure message from his own head of security. Marked urgent. Sir, we traced a second set of financial trails. Elena Petrova's bank account received a wire 2 days before the dinner. 100,000 euros. Origin, a shell company linked to Mark Duval. She may not be an ally. She may be his insurance policy. Victor's world tilted. The documents in his hand suddenly felt poisoned. 100,000 euros. Enough to cover her mother's surgery and more. Had she warned him only to set him up for a bigger fall? Had the disappointment in her eyes at the table been an act, the misdirection hit like a gut punch. Every instinct that had kept him alive in boardrooms screamed betrayal. Mark planting Elena to force Victor into a rash move, then using it against him in front of the sheik. It was elegant, cruel, exactly the kind of long game Mark had always excelled at. Victor's hands shook as he read the security report again. The timing was perfect, too perfect. He thought of Elena in the cafe. Her steady gaze. The way her voice had cracked only once when mentioning her mother. Could that have been performance? The woman who had lost everything for telling the truth once before? Or the woman who had learned to sell that story for the highest bidder? He sank into the chair that had once been Isabel's. The moral crossroads stretched before him like a storm-tossed sea. If he protected Elena now, he might be saving a traitor and destroying his own empire. If he abandoned her, he would become the very coward she had accused him of being at the dinner. And Mark, his brother, would either be innocent or the architect of the deepest betrayal of his life. Either way, Victor lost something irreplaceable. The clock on the mantel struck the hour. The boathouse meeting was in 40 minutes. His driver was waiting. Elena had texted him an hour earlier, "I have more proof. Meet me at the cafe again at dusk if you still believe me." Two paths. Two women he had failed in different ways. One dead. One alive. One offering truth. One possibly offering lies. Victor stood slowly. His reflection in the rain-streaked window looked older than he remembered. The power imbalance that had once felt like armor now felt like chains. He had to choose: protect the empire and stay silent, or risk everything for a woman whose eyes had once asked him who he really was. He picked up the folder. Heart-hammering. The decision would define the rest of his life. Outside, the rain intensified, as if the sky itself were waiting for his answer. The boardroom on the 32nd floor of Laurent Global's Paris headquarters felt smaller than Victor remembered. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass, reflecting off the polished walnut table where contracts lay open like traps waiting to spring. The sheikh sat at the far end, flanked by his aides, his expression one of patient calculation. Mark Duval occupied the chair to Victor's right, smiling, the same easy smile that had once comforted him through sleepless hospital nights. Victor could feel the weight of every gaze, every unspoken expectation. The signing was supposed to be a formality. Instead, it had become a battlefield. He had made his choice at the boathouse. Philippe Moreau had shown him the Truth Bank records, encrypted emails, even a voice memo Mark thought had been deleted. Isabel's old lawyer had confirmed what Elena's documents only hinted at. Mark wasn't just skimming. He was systematically transferring control to a shadow network he had built over 3 years. Convinced Victor's grief had left him soft, vulnerable, ready to be eased out. "He told me once," Philippe had said quietly, "that you were no longer the lion, just the man who mourned." The words had burned away Victor's last hesitation. He had texted Elena at dawn, "Come to the headquarters. Service entrance. Discreet. I believe you." Now she stood just inside the side door. Dressed in a simple black suit the head of security had quietly provided. No uniform. No tray. She looked every inch the professional she had once been, poised, unreadable. The slate-gray eyes steady. Only Victor and Philippe knew she was there. To everyone else, she was simply additional staff for the closing documents. Mark didn't even glance at her. He was too busy sliding the final contract toward Victor. "Sign here, partner," he said warmly. "The future starts today." Victor's pen hovered. The room held its breath. Then, in the brief lull, while the sheikh consulted his aide in low tones, the moment arrived. The sheikh leaned toward his senior aide and spoke in rapid Arabic, voice low, confident that no one at this French table would understand. "Once he signs, initiate the Malta transfer immediately. Duval has already arranged the first vessel reroute. Laurent will notice nothing until the money is gone. The old man is broken by grief, he won't fight." The aide nodded once. "As planned. 17% to our accounts before noon." Victor felt the words like ice water. He understood enough Arabic to catch the gist, but not the precision. Elena, however, understood every syllable. She stepped forward calmly, voice cutting through the room in flawless, accentless Arabic that carried the authority of someone who had negotiated in Riyadh boardrooms. "Actually, Sheikh Khalid, the transfer will not be initiated. The Malta entity was flagged this morning by an independent audit. Every vessel reroute has been frozen under international maritime law. You will find the evidence in the annex I just uploaded to the shared drive. The Sheikh's head snapped up. His aides froze. The entire room went still as stone. Elena switched seamlessly to perfect French, addressing the table without raising her voice. And for those who prefer clarity in our host's language, the contracts you are about to sign contain 3 falsified clauses. The margin diversion is not 9% as presented. It is 17%. The recipient is a shell company controlled jointly by Monsieur Duval and a silent partner within your own organization. Sheikh, over the next 36 months, 214 million euros would have disappeared. I have the original drafts, the wire instructions, and the deleted emails. They are now projected behind you. A hidden screen on the wall lit up. Documents appeared, timestamps, signatures, bank codes. Mark's name was on every one. Gasps rippled through the room. One of the European financiers stood so quickly his chair toppled. The Sheikh's face darkened with fury, not at Victor, but at the aide beside him. Mark's smile shattered. This is absurd, Victor. She's the waitress from the dinner, the one we fired for disrespect. She's clearly trying. Victor rose slowly, placing his hand on Elena's shoulder for the first time in public. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of every regret he had carried since that night at the chateau. She is Dr. Elena Petrova, he said, his voice steady and resonant. Former senior risk analyst at Durand and Voss, and the only person in this room brave enough to tell me the truth when I refused to hear it. I invited her here, and I will not sign. He turned to Mark, meeting his oldest friend's eyes without flinching. You told people I was broken. That grief made me weak. Maybe it did for a while, but it also taught me to recognize the people who stand up when it costs them everything. You were ready to steal what we built together because you thought I'd be too numb to notice. You were wrong. Mark's face twisted, the charming mask finally gone. After everything I did for you, when Isabel was dying, I was the one. You were. Victor interrupted, voice thick but unwavering. And I will never forget that. But loyalty doesn't give you the right to rob me blind, or to humiliate the woman who tried to save us both. The Sheikh rose, speaking now in careful English. This meeting is over. My legal team will be in contact regarding the damages your partner attempted to inflict on my reputation. He looked at Elena with new respect. Mademoiselle Petrova, your Arabic is impeccable, and your courage is noted. The aides began gathering documents in frantic silence. The financiers muttered among themselves, already distancing themselves from Mark. Security appeared at the door. Victor had arranged that too. Mark stepped toward Victor, voice dropping to a desperate hiss. You're throwing away 23 years for a server who fed you lies. Victor shook his head. The reversal now complete. Earned in every painful second since the dinner. No. Mark, I'm choosing the truth. I almost lost because I was too afraid to listen. And I'm choosing the woman who risked her mother's life to give me that chance. Elena remained beside him, silent, but her hand brushed his once brief. Steady. A promise that this time he had not failed her. The Sheikh and his team exited first, the door closing with finality. Mark was escorted out moments later, still protesting, his empire of lies collapsing around him in real time. Victor turned to Elena as the room emptied. The power imbalance that had once defined their worlds had shattered. He was no longer the untouchable magnate. She was no longer the invisible server. They stood as equals in the sudden quiet. Thank you, he said simply. She met his eyes. The disappointment from that first night finally replaced by something warmer. Earned. You finally listened. Outside the windows. The Seine flowed on, indifferent to the fortunes that had just shifted forever in the room above it. But inside, Victor Laurent felt something he had not felt since Isabelle's passing, the quiet, powerful certainty that he was becoming the man he had always wanted to be. The status reversal had begun not with thunder, but with a woman's voice speaking truth in 2 languages and a man finally finding the courage to stand beside her. 3 weeks later, the chateau stood quieter than Victor remembered. No guests, no deals hanging in the balance, just the ancient oaks whispering in the autumn wind and the soft click of his shoes on the gravel as he walked the path Isabelle had once loved. The boardroom scandal had made headlines for exactly 6 days, then vanished, as scandals do when the powerful choose silence over spectacle. Marc Duval was under investigation in 3 countries. The sheikh had withdrawn quietly, issuing a statement praising transparent leadership, and Victor Laurent had done something no one expected. He had stepped back from the daily helm, naming a new operations director while he focused on rebuilding what truly mattered. He found Elena in the small library off the main hall, the same room where he had once sat with the poisoned folder. She was reading not contracts, but a worn copy of Camus in the original French. Her mother's surgery had been scheduled for the following Tuesday. Victor had made the arrangements himself, transferring the full amount to the clinic in Geneva without fanfare. He had told Elena it was repayment, not charity. She had accepted only after seeing the specialist's report her mother would walk again without pain for the first time in years. "You didn't have to come all the way out here to tell me," she said, closing the book as he entered. Her voice still carried that quiet precision, but the walls between them had thinned. "I didn't come to tell you," Victor replied. He sat across from her, the empty chair no longer feeling like an accusation. "I came to ask you something." Elena waited, slate-gray eyes steady. "I'm clearing your name publicly tomorrow morning. Full statement to the press and every employee at Laurent Global. Dr. Elena Petrova, former senior risk analyst, the woman who saved the company from internal collapse. Your record at Durand and Voss will be restored. I've already spoken with their board. They're issuing an apology and a settlement." She exhaled slowly, the first crack in her composure he had seen since the boardroom. "You don't owe me that. I owe you more than that," he said. "I owe you the dignity they took from you 4 years ago, and the dignity I failed to protect that night at dinner." His voice roughened. "Every time I close my eyes, I still see you standing there while Mark turned your accent into a joke. I still hear myself telling you to go back to your duties. I was the one with all the power, and I used it to stay comfortable. That's not strength. That's fear wearing a suit." Elena reached across the small table and touched his hand. The gesture was brief, but it carried the weight of every unsaid word between them. "You listened when it mattered," she said softly. "Most men with your kind of empire never do." Victor turned his palm up, letting their fingers rest together. The guilt that had lived in his chest for weeks was still there, but it had changed shape, become fuel instead of poison. "I'm offering you the position of Vice President of Risk and Strategic Oversight," he continued. "Full authority. Your own team. Salary commensurate with the role you were always meant to hold. No one will ever call you the help again. Not in my company. Not anywhere." Elena smiled for the first time, a small, real smile that reached her eyes. "You're serious, completely. You see patterns others miss. You speak languages they don't even know exist. And most importantly, you have the courage to tell the truth when it costs you everything." That's rarer than any fleet I own." She was quiet for a long moment, gazing out the window toward the Seine, glittering in the distance. "My mother will be in recovery for months. I'll need time to be with her. Take all the time you need. The role will be waiting, and the apartment the company keeps for executives in the 7th arrondissement, consider it yours. Closer to the hospital. Closer to everything." Elena looked back at him, and something shifted in the air between them. The gratitude that had once defined their connection was still there, but it had grown roots deeper, warmer, mutual. "You're not doing this to ease your conscience," she said. "Not a question." "No," Victor admitted. "I'm doing it because watching you stand in that boardroom, switching from Arabic to French without missing a beat, reminded me what real power looks like. Not the kind that signs contracts, the kind that refuses to stay silent. I want that kind of power beside me. I want you beside me." The words hung between them, simple and honest. No grand declarations, no pressure, just truth. Elena stood and walked to the window. Victor followed, stopping a respectful distance away. The late afternoon light painted the room gold. "I was angry with you for a long time," she said quietly. "Not just for the dinner, for what it represented, men who look right through people like me until we become useful. But then I watched you choose the harder path. You could have signed those papers and kept your empire intact. Instead, you risked it all because one server told you the truth. That changed something in me." She turned to face him. "I accept the position and the apartment, but I need you to understand something. Victor, this isn't gratitude. This is respect. And maybe something more. If we give it time." He took one step closer. The space between them felt charged, alive. "I have all the time in the world," he said. Their first kiss was slow, almost tentative, the kind two wounded people share when they finally stop measuring what they've lost and start noticing what they've found. No fireworks, no sweeping music, just the quiet certainty of two people who had seen the worst of each other and chosen to stay anyway. Weeks turned into months. Elena's mother came through the surgery stronger than anyone expected. Victor visited the hospital often, bringing small gifts and listening to Nadia's stories about Sofia in the old days. The company flourished under new leadership, transparent routes, audited margins, a culture where competence mattered more than pedigree. Elena's name was spoken with admiration now, never mockery. She moved into the vice presidential role with the same quiet precision she had once used to serve wine, spotting risks before they became disasters and teaching younger analysts that courage was the most valuable currency. One crisp evening, they walked the same terrace where Victor had once stood alone with his grief. The empty chair was gone. In its place stood a simple stone bench overlooking the river. "I used to think power was about how many ships you could command," Victor said, his arm around her shoulders. "Now I think it's about how many people you're willing to protect when no one is watching." Elena leaned into him. "And dignity," she added softly, "is refusing to let anyone take yours or anyone else's without a fight." They stood in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Seine in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a ship sounded its horn, one of Laurent Global's vessels heading toward open water. Victor felt the old pull of the sea, but it no longer felt like an escape. It felt like a beginning. He had lost a brother in Mark. He had lost years to grief. But in their place, he had found something stronger, a partner who saw him not as the untouchable magnate, but as a man still learning how to be brave. A woman whose courage had rewritten both their stories. True power, Victor realized as he held her closer, wasn't the ability to crush empires. It was the willingness to rebuild them together with someone who had once been invisible, and who had taught him how to see clearly again. Some stories stay with us long after the final words fade. Thank you for sitting with this one, for giving your time and your heart to the quiet spaces between power and silence, where a single voice can still change everything. There's something profoundly human about the way we can sit at the same table with someone for years and still miss the depth of who they truly are. Victor had built fleets that crossed every ocean, commanded rooms where every word carried weight. Yet it took one woman's steady courage, spoken first in perfect French, then in Arabic. No one expected her to know, to remind him that the greatest strength isn't in holding the pen that signs the contracts. It's in the willingness to truly listen when every instinct tells you to look away. Elena showed us that dignity isn't something the world hands you when your uniform matches the room. It's something you carry even when the laughter turns cruel, even when the most powerful man in the room chooses silence. And in the end, it was that same dignity that became the bridge between them, not erasing the hurt, but slowly, carefully turning it into something shared. What lingers most is how gently they found their way back to each other, not in sweeping declarations or dramatic rescues, but in the small, earned moments, a hand resting on a shoulder in a boardroom, hospital visits where words weren't needed, the simple decision to restore a name that had been erased. They didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. They simply chose, day after day, to become the people who could stand beside each other without the old shadows falling between them. Perhaps that's the quiet miracle hidden inside every real second chance. It doesn't erase the pain of what came before. It simply asks us to become someone better because of it, someone who sees the invisible, who speaks when it costs something, who builds again with the person who once risked everything to warn them. Wherever you are right now, I hope this story leaves you with a gentle reminder to look a little closer at the people who move through your world unseen. Sometimes the voice that saves everything is the one we almost failed to hear. Until next time, take care of yourselves.